we have planted in one of our countless lifetimes, and we've planted billions of karmic seeds, and we will talk about this, that the karmic seed that will determine our next life, that seed is triggered about the time before we stop breathing. So this is the period, as Lama Zopa says, if you want to help anybody in their life, when they need you most is right then. It's like a technical point. It's not some emotional thing, you know. I mean, these days, so many more people are talking about death, and people in the materialist world too, trying to confront death, not be so afraid of it, make death more peaceful for people, for the family and the dying person, which is marvelous. But the point in Buddhism is so specific, you know, it's so precise. It's that you want to ensure that you do as much as you can for the mouse, for your dog, for the ant, for your grandmother, whoever is dying, that they die, two things, with a peaceful mind. And because when the mind is peaceful, that will encourage the mind to be virtuous, and that will encourage a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered, which is the seed that will determine that we'll at least get another decent human rebirth. That's it. That's the point. The bottom line. That's the short-term reason why it is so important to help someone at the time of death. So, I mean, this, of course, is a big contradiction in our culture, the materialist world. Death is the end. So you would think that's when a person needs us most. And that, unfortunately, is often what is expressed. I don't know about in Russia, but around the world, I mean, old people's homes are these, some of them, such terrible places where people are drugged out of their brains and left to die in misery, you know, because they're old and they're useless. What good are they? It's a completely opposite view in Buddhism, you know. It's that life is over, yes, but now the crucial thing is to ensure that a virtuous karmic seed is triggered, which will ensure that the person will take another decent human rebirth so they can carry on in their spiritual practice. And even if it's a dog or a mouse, by helping them die peacefully, not just taking them to the vet and killing them, you know, using these polite words. I'm sure you do it in Russia. We call them putting it down, sending them to sleep. No, it's called killing them, you know, to ensure that they too, I mean, especially the mouse, the dog, the ant, they need to get a human birth, and there's various ways we can help them. So the whole book is a handbook, basically. So it's two things. One is to learn to live our life within the framework of the reality of impermanence and death. That's the crucial first one. And that has to start right now. And then there's the information about exactly this technical process, what occurs at the time of death. And that's what's most fascinating, you know. But so these two approaches, two ways of getting ready for death. So the whole book is addressed to us as a helper. Hang on. You know, of course, the advice is for us, for when we die, but obviously it has to be addressed to somebody to give all this advice to, you know, and that is to us to help our loved ones. The whole book is framed in terms of helping our loved ones die well. So the book started actually years ago when Lama Zopa was teaching at his center in France, his Institute Vajrayogini, I think nearly 20 years ago, and he was talking on another topic altogether. And what happened, one of his older students, a friend of mine, she went to Rinpoche and said, my old father died suddenly and I didn't know what to do. So Rinpoche was very surprised, I think, because, you know, one of the key practices, we all know if you've been listening to Buddha's teachings, Buddha's always talking about impermanence, he's always talking about death. And then we know if we've studied the Lam Rim, one of the very first topics is to learn about impermanence, recognizing we're going to die. And it's a really powerful teaching. It's not put behind, you know. So Rinpoche was very surprised because this is one of the teachings he gives all the time. But I suppose what it points out is how we don't like thinking about death. We live in denial of death. We don't want to die. So, of course, we have to understand why that is and get past that. So then, as a result of his student coming to him, then Rinpoche changed direction in his teachings, and then he proceeded to teach about death and impermanence. And much of what is in this book is from what he gave at that time, the teachings. And so basically, the sources Rinpoche is using are teachings by his own lamas, and also a text written by some Tibetan years and years ago. I don't think it's translated into English. It was a book written by one Tibetan to help the Tibetan people themselves learn all about their own, you know, especially lay people who don't study it anymore, learn about what is important at the time of death, you know. So he quotes that book quite often. So the book is about, yeah. So the book, it's divided into 5 sections, 5 parts. The first part is kind of in general how to think about death, practical things, what happens at death. Everybody dies, so there's no need to be afraid. Diana, have you got a copy of the book in front of you? Because I'll be quoting from it sometimes. Can we check that Diana's got a copy of that book? Do you know if she has, Anastasia? Have you made sure that she has a copy of the book? Anastasia, can't you hear me? What's happening? Can someone tell me? I need to know if Diana has a copy of this book and I want her to have it in Russian. I'm waiting to hear from somebody.
Yes, there is this book in Russian, Venerable.
I know. I want Diana to have it. She's translating.
And Diana receive it in 1 minute.
Pardon?
Diana will receive it in 1 minute.
Good, okay,
she's got it. She's already got it.
I'll be quoting from it. The version I think you've got in Russia, it is this one, isn't it? We did establish it's the later version. Yes, Diana, Anastasia, not the earlier version. Which one did we establish it is the translation of?
Venerable, in Russian there is only one book, and it was translated in 2015.
I understand that. And which book did you use to translate? The one published by Wisdom or the FPMT version? I need to know. It's important because they're very different.
I think, Venerable, FPMT, the one which I sent you before, just let me take a look.
You mean how to help our loved ones enjoy death? That one?
The one which is, yes, how to face the death without fear.
To their next rebirth, that one.
Yes.
Good. Okay, fantastic. So Diana, just to let you know, this latest version, which is called How to Face Death Without Fear, published by Wisdom, is slightly different, but essentially the same. Essentially the same. The chapters numbers are the same. The practice numbers are the same. Okay, just there's a few extra things in this version, which we'll talk about. So basically, as I'm saying, the first part, how to think about death and reincarnation. What happens at death? Everyone dies, so there's no need to be afraid. Death is easy when we've given up attachment. Get ready for death by living life with a good heart. Different things like this. Then the part 2, how we literally the technical thing. How do we go from one life to the next? What happens actually at death? Then there's a teaching from the sutras about, in particular, death. The role of the 12 links at the time of death. And then there's the major one, which is from Tantra, which is the description of the gradual deconstruction of the various components of the person, which is divided in terms of 9 stages. This is the 8 stages of death. And also what happens after death, the intermediate state, and how we get reborn. And then a wonderful chapter, and we'll talk about this, about why, as the chapter is called, death is what the yogis have been waiting for. We'll describe what this means. This is coming especially from tantric practice. Then part 3, 4, and 5 are all the details of what to do when. Basically, the weeks and months before death, the days before death, the hours before death, all the different practices to do. There's about 87 different practices, and they're all numbered, and they're at the back of the book. And in fact, they're 2/3 of the book, these 87 different practices that you could do at any stage. Of course, you won't do all 87. Rinpoche's got so many, but they're all listed, So all these next sections are what to do at the different stages. Part 3 is what to do in the months and weeks before death. Part 4 is what to do in the hours and days after the breath has stopped. And part 5 is what to do after the mind has left the body. So it's all very detailed, and it's a handbook, and it's incredibly helpful. I mean, mostly we don't know. There was my friend, even though she's a good Buddhist, she didn't know what to do because we don't like thinking about death, So let's first look then at this whole approach to Buddha's teachings on impermanence and death, and the way Atisha, as we know, and Lama Tsongkhapa in the Lam Rim talks about the necessity to live our lives in the framework of the reality of death. We all know about this, but it's so important. But let's look at why it is so important. I mentioned before, but why do we not like the idea of death? Let's look at the logic of it. Well, it's because of attachment. I mean, you know, attachment, the main, effectively, as far as Buddha is concerned in the Four Noble Truths, the main reason we suffer in daily life is because of this bottomless pit of this emotional hunger called attachment, to always get what I want every second. So it clings to things, it looks forward to things, it holds on, it possesses things, it constantly thinks about things. This is what attachment does. And it's very painful. And so, as Lama Zopa says, the main reason that death is so horrible for most people, why there's so much fear at the time of death, is because of attachment. So attachment to what? Not even to your loved ones, not even to your money or anything. Those are there. But the real most primordial fear is because of attachment to me, and which means this body, because that's what we identify with, isn't it? We feel and see and taste and touch our body. That's what, as far as we're concerned, that's me. So we have this primordial kind of fear-based grasping at me, and the thought of not being me, of losing me, is just too unbearable for us. So this is why we throughout our lives, there's no way you can be ready for death if you haven't prepared in your life, you know. And the way to prepare for in your life isn't to think about death, imagine death, not like that. It's to live your life within the reality that things change. I mean, that's first is the most fundamental teaching of the Buddhas, that things change in their nature. So this is pointing to one of the deepest delusions in our mind. As we all know, you know, we're going to go into this. Buddha's main point about why we suffer in general, all sentient beings, the key reason all sentient beings suffer in general is these neurotic, deluded misconceptions deep in the bones of our being. First of all, ego grasping, the root delusion that believes in a concrete me. Then there's this attachment to get what that me wants. And then as a result of that, there's anger and all the others. But there's also this one, and Lama Zopa calls it this grasping at permanent me. The subtler delusion, which grasps at the intrinsic me, that's the root delusion. But then the grosser one, which is pretty intense and is there all the time, it's just implicit in our minds, is this believing intensely, wanting intensely for me not to change. I mean, why do you think we can't stand getting old? Why can't we stand when we look in the mirror seeing the wrinkles and the double chins? We can't stand the idea of getting older. You know, it's just very primordial in our minds, and everybody's like this. So one of the key functions of all these delusions is they prevent us from living in reality. We live in a fantasy land, but they're so deeply ingrained in us, we don't even notice that they are deluded states of mind. They're existing in our mind at a deep level of assumption, you know. So we can see, you know, I mean, it's interesting. One of my friends, this is like 40 years ago, she was a Buddhist and she was working in the hospice movement in California. Now it's very popular, as we know, and I'm sure in Russia as well, you know, which is great. And she told me that it was a given among all her colleagues that most people died with fear. It was evident. It was clear to you, everybody. But the only ones who didn't have fear were the ones who had some kind of spiritual practice. And I think that's not because spiritual practice is kind of mystical in its nature. The simple point about having a spiritual practice, usually, let's say you're a Christian, for example, which would have been the typical one back then, that if you're a Christian or a Muslim, you have faith in a creator and you believe you will go to heaven when you die. So then it's so interesting that person wouldn't have fear because they're going to look forward to going to heaven. Very practical. And Lama Zopa talks in the book here about that. It's a very useful thing to help a person who's dying. If your beloved grandma and she's devoted to God, and this is all the different practices in how to help your loved ones. This is one where you talk to them about heaven. You would talk to them about God. This is using their attachment. As Rinpoche says, it's very skillful. It's attachment, but you're using the attachment for the sake of the person. Because if you look in your ordinary life, this is a really simple point. Look in your daily life. One of the functions of attachment is, as we know, is to always look forward to something. You look at your mind. We are never stopping all day. You get up in the morning, you look forward to breakfast. Then you look forward to do this. Then you look forward to the next thing. Then you look forward to lunch. Then you look forward to the afternoon. Then you look forward to dinner. We're forever looking into the future, thinking about it and planning for it. That's a function of attachment. It's one of its functions. It's highly conceptual. It's always busy thinking about the future. That's exactly one of the jobs of attachment. Another job of attachment is holding on to what we've got now. So these play out really powerfully at the time of death. You're clinging to this one, terrified of letting go. And because for most people who aren't Christian, who aren't Muslim, who aren't Buddhist, let's say, who don't have a proper spiritual practice, if they're called, you're, say, got a materialist philosophy, there is nothing to look forward to except falling into a black hole. I mean, who wants to look forward to falling into a black hole? No wonder we have so much fear. It's so obvious, it's terrifying because finally there's nothing to look forward to. It makes sense that there is so much fear. But if you have faith in God, and you really do, let's say, you can help your grandmother. You can talk about how God loves her, how heaven is beautiful. She can relax and she can let go of this one, stop clinging, stop the fear, and look forward to heaven. Lama Zopa says that's still attachment, but it's very wise. It's helping. Now, exactly the same for a Buddhist. You look forward to the next life. So it's very logical, but this is what we're trying to do here is help us understand attachment. So why most people who have never thought about death, have never thought about impermanence, finally living their lives looking forward to tomorrow, looking forward to the boyfriend, looking forward to the husband, looking forward to the grandkids, looking forward to something, or being depressed because you can't look forward because there's nothing there. Then finally death comes, and because of the Buddhist view, we have died countless times, but we don't remember. But the fear is built deep in our instinct, So it's really very terrifying. This is not trying to make us shocked, and it's completely natural. So of course we must prepare, because this is again the technical point. The law of karma, as we know from studying, is that every millisecond that our mind is functioning, we are having thoughts. Every thought is an intention, and every intention means karma, and it's dropping seeds into our bank vault. I use that analogy, our bank vault. We have got billions and trillions of karmic seeds in our bank vaults, and one of those, one will ripen at the time of death, one. So there are trillions of them, lots of them negative and some positive for sure. So we want to try as much as possible to make the conditions of death most conducive, most appropriate, so the person can be peaceful and therefore virtuous. And when the mind is virtuous, that can enable a virtuous karmic seed to be triggered. So that's why it's so important to think about death before you die, to be ready for it. But we don't, we just go, oh, I'll be okay. One of the commonest things in modern world, materialist people, they say, oh, I hope I die in my sleep. I don't want to know about it. Of course, the assumption is when you die, then you've disappeared. So people don't want to be warned about it. But of course, as we know, the Buddhist view is, and this is the basis of this, all the teachings in this book, is that our consciousness will continue. So in other words, it's a practical issue, not some religious, holy idea, From the Buddhist point of view, it's practical. So that let's first then talk about, just remind ourselves about the teachings about impermanence as they're expressed in the Lam Rim, which is the way to learn to live our lives in daily life, meaning within the framework, within the reality of the fact that death is definite. The first point is death is definite. So there's something that's fairly evident to us. We know that. We're not stupid. But the Buddha's telling us, if we look into our minds, we're going to see that we might intellectually know that death is definite, but we don't want to think about it. We act as if it is not definite. So the way to think about this, the way to meditate on it, the way to think about it, to familiarize our mind with it, is it's very practical. You don't have to be sitting on a cushion with your eyes closed. You can do that for sure. But the main one is to look at life, look around, the evidence is right there. So right now, how do we look at things? How do we look at life in terms of death? Well, first of all, because we read so much news and on the television, on our iPads and on the computer these days, everything is so available to us. So we're being bombarded daily by all kinds of beings dying, war zones and people, murders, all the ants are dying, the animals are dying, the millions of creatures are being killed. We're very aware of death. But we don't get the wake-up call. This is the key point. Atisha, in his teachings, in which is Tsongkhapa used as his basis, the reason to think about death isn't to make us scared, it's to give us a wake-up call. So that means we have to look at every time all these different points in the lam rim. He wants us to contemplate this point and contemplate that, blah, blah, blah. We've got to think, what is the action point? What's the action? What's the learning from this? What am I supposed to do with this? Well, this first teaching about impermanence, which is entry-level junior school grade 1 in the lam rim, Atisha gets us to think about this impermanence in terms of 3 points. And each of those is divided. We'll just look at them generally. The first one is that death is definite. So how do you think about that? How do you learn from that? What's the action from that? Well, the way to learn right now, as I said, we read so much about death. But basically, if it's all the strangers, we've got enemies and friends and strangers, haven't we? So we look at all the world who are dying, the people in the war zones. They're not our people. We kind of go, oh, isn't it awful? These wars are so terrible. And we'll see all the dying people. We'll read about the dying people. But it doesn't really touch us very deeply. They're not our beloveds. They're not us. So it's very distant for us. We go, oh yeah, there's death. Oh, more people dying. Maybe we're a bit shocked when we see the terrible bodies. Maybe we're shocked when we see. So then sometimes when the beings that we're close to, like if we're particularly attached to some animals, and then we hear about the animals dying, then we get upset. We get angry. We get angry and upset and feel very hurt. And then it gets really close to home when our beloveds die, our pet dies, our grandmother, our beloved boyfriend, our beloved child. I mean, this is when the suffering really hits us. But each of these times, still, we don't get the main point. The main learning, we don't get the main learning. And why is this? It's so interesting. Because we have this deep grasping at permanent me. As Lama Zopa says, we divide the whole world into living people and dying people. And guess what category we're in? We're in the living category, aren't we? We're living people, as far as we're concerned. So dying people are over there. So they're very distant if it's strangers. They're getting a bit closer. And then when it's your beloveds, your family, and your own pet, then it's really close to us. But there's this hubris, there's this kind of arrogance almost of kind of like it's over there. Death is over there and it's happening to somebody else. This is very deep inside us because we can't bear the thought of thinking that I'm a dying person. I mean, look how we think when we think about a dying person. Like there's your grandmother, as far as you're concerned, your grandma's old, but she's living. She's a real person and she's got a life and you'll see her tomorrow and you'll see her next year. We believe this. We believe this totally. And suddenly you hear that grandma's got cancer and she'll be dead in 6 months. We are so shocked. But look what happens. We now put her in this other category of people. You can't even think of your grandmother as a real person now because she's a dying person. The person you hear about, a person at work who's dying, you don't want to even think about them. And if you do talk to them, you can't talk to them like a normal person because they're a dying person. They're not even a real person. You look how we think. And as Lama Zopa says, it's completely a joke. We are all dying. It's not a cliche. It's a literal truth. It's just a question of when, but we don't believe that, do we? I'm a living person. And what we mean is we see ourselves, that's what it means by saying I'm a permanent person, I'm living, which means I'm not going to be dead today and I'm not going to die tomorrow and I'll be able to go to my holiday next year. We think like this. It's so automatic in our minds. So if we did some research, which we don't, this is not the kind of research we do, I promise. If we did some research, we would probably find that the majority of people who die without realizing they're going to die. They don't call themselves dying people. Babies die. I mean, if we did some research, look at the babies who die. Look at the fetuses. Even you think about this. The sentient beings who win the lottery and get a human birth, and they're in the womb and they die before they're born. So they either have they're aborted or they miscarry. I wouldn't be surprised if millions of fetuses die. We never do that research, right? Well, then death, this is the second point now. Death is definite. Well, whoever comes into life will die. We are all dying people, and that's not a joke. It's a powerful way to think. But the next point is the time of death is not definite. This should be very scary for us because even though we sort of might accept that we're dying, but I won't die yet. I'm going to die in the long distance, way into the future. You know, the feeling is like that. But if we do this research, it's very shocking to us. It should counteract that nonsense, that misconception in our mind. Fetuses die, babies die, 1-year-olds die, children die, teenagers die, 40-year-olds die, happy people die, healthy people die. But we don't want to think about that. We think it's a mistake. Something went wrong. The only person who should die, and even then it's too shocking for us, is your 90-year-old grandmother, or you when you're 90. Even then you can't get it when you're 90. You still feel like I'm not a dying person, you know. So we can see all of these misconceptions come from the root misconception of I'm a permanent person, because we can't stand the thought of impermanence. We can see this. When we hear it, we understand it. So where's the problem with this? What's the problem with this? Where's the problem? Why should we think I'm an impermanent person? Why should we think, as Lama Zopa puts it, I could die today? Well, the logic is, what's the action? What's the action from this? And this is in the third point. The third point is to think about that at the time of death, at the time precisely when your mind leaves your body, which is what death is, at that point, this is a technical point, you know, at that point, what is useful to me? What is useful to me? Well, it's so logical. We all know we have these cliched sayings. You can't bring it with you. You can't bring it with you. We joke about it, but this is literally true, and we have to make this a reality for us. So at the time of death, my body is no use. My possessions, my pension plan, my beloved husband, my children, my grandchildren, my house, all my beautiful things, my reputation, the money in the bank. In other words, this is not being cynical, and this is not being fundamentalist. It's a practical issue. What is useful to you? What can you bring? Sorry, I'm getting sneezing here. It really is a practical issue, because what death is your consciousness leaving the body at a certain point, and then due to karma, being programmed by your karma and to take another rebirth, okay? So at the time of death, the only thing that is useful to us, according to the Buddhist view, is your mind. And the only thing in your mind that is useful to you is your positive karmic imprints. So what are they? A positive karmic imprint is what you drop into your bank vault when you do a good action, when you have a good thought, when you say a nice word, or when you do something useful in your lifetime. So that's the only things in your life that you do that are useful at the time of death. So this is a tough one. Because why? Why is this tough? Because what do we spend our lives thinking about? This is keep not hearing this as moralistic. It's sort of like, you know, you're going to leave your house. You know, you've rented your house is rented. The furniture is rented. This is a really good analogy. You live in a house that is rented. Nothing belongs to you. It's rented furniture, rented in the kitchen, rented everything, beautiful garden, everything is rented. And at some point, you have to leave that house and leave those possessions. This is such a dumb example, but it is so clearly accurate. Think about it. So, of course, while you're living there, it is useful to keep things clean. It's nice to have a clean house, and it's nice to have nice flowers in the garden. But what happens is, because we have enormous attachment, because you've lived in that house for 30 years, you believe it belongs to you. This is my flowers and my teapots and my kettle and my bed and my mattress and my carpet. And so you think about it all the time. You get upset when someone breaks it, and you believe it's yours, and you're totally attached to it. Well, it's obvious that when the real estate agent has to come dragging you out when your lease is up, you'll be crying bitterly because you have to leave everything behind. I mean, this is such a stupid example, but it is simply so precise. So we spend our lives thinking, maintaining the body, maintaining the husband, the children, holding on to them, possessing them, fear of losing them, the money in the bank and the worries. Look at our mind all day, worrying about the money, worrying about the house, worrying about the sickness, worrying about the boyfriend, because we're attached. It's just practical. This is not moralistic. It's practical. It's practical. So when you suddenly realize you've been given a date, let's say it's good to have a date. Actually, the best way to die is to have a date. So now you can prepare, because you live in the reality, I'm never going to die. But suddenly you got a date. And this is why you talk to people who've been given a date, or you're going to die in 6 months, you're going to die in 2 months, you've got cancer, you could die in 2 years. First of all, you get over the grief and the loss, and then you start to recognize there's a possibility I will die. Then you start living your life properly. This is the irony. Then you'll start living your life within the framework of the reality that you'll lose this body, you'll lose the possessions, you'll lose the husband. So you start lessening your attachment and start to become more focused on preparing. This is just practical. It's just practical. It's practical, but it's painful to hear it. We can't bear to hear it. It's too distant for our minds, you know. The lamas all say when we've just realized impermanence, forget emptiness, forget bodhicitta, forget renunciation. Just begin to realize impermanence. Everything changes. We suddenly see life differently, because the moment we're seeing everything through the lens of it's permanent, it is unchanging, it is forever. We don't think we think like this, but analyze it. We do, you know. So these points are not just corny, not to make you fearful. It's to get us to get the appropriate perspective. Because when you realize, if you've got a Buddhist path, when you realize that you will die definitely, even you don't know when you'll die, then of course you know that means for you, you know that at the time of death, the only thing you want to bring with you is your virtuous karmic imprints. That's your decision. No one's forcing you to think this way. That's how Buddhists think. That's what you want. You want to make sure that at the time of your death, which could be today, you want to have virtue programmed in your mind. So obviously you'd better start doing it now. That's the whole logic of thinking about death. That's the whole logic of living one's life within the framework of impermanence and death. And then of course your attachment becomes less. You forgive your husband more easily. You let go of the suffering. You let go of the dramas, because you realize life is changing and you'll be dead any minute. These words, we are so familiar with them. I am so familiar with them. I'm saying them with certainty, but deep in my bones, I don't believe it still, because this is really a deep misconception in our bones. So just even realizing impermanence gives us a whole new perspective on life. You get more realistic about what is important. You really get that. You get realistic about what is important, you know. And this is the point. This is the point. I always tell this lovely story about this Tibetan astrologer. They tell it in the Lam Rim. This Tibetan astrologer, he had just done his own chart, and it looked on the chart, it said that he would die today. He's his own astrologer, right? And immediately he didn't believe it, because that's how we all are. No, of course I'm not going to die today, he thought. And he was sitting there, apparently, something like this. He was sitting there with his arm resting on the windowsill, and there's one of these wooden shutters, and he's poking his ear with some pointy thing while he's thinking about where his calculations were wrong. And so the wooden shutter hit his elbow, and it went into his ear, and he died. While he was thinking about, how could I have made a mistake in my calculations? Of course, I'm not going to die today. I love that story. Because we have this deep assumption, even if we're old, you know, we still, and this is what's interesting. We look in the mirror, we know we are old. I look in the mirror now and I know I'm not 20 anymore. I know, according to the numbers, I'm closer, much closer to death, even if I have a long life, than I am to birth. That's clear. But still, this is the point, in my being, you know, I really believe I will wake up tomorrow. I'm planning for tomorrow. Which doesn't, I'm planning for tomorrow because I believe I'll wake up tomorrow. I believe I'll wake up tomorrow. Think about this. And even more than that, it's the feeling of, you know, like when you're going on a journey, even if it's a 2-kilometer journey from your office to your home or to the shops, and you're very familiar with that journey. Think about this. There's a very vivid feeling, isn't there, of moving forward. You've walked out your front door, and as you're walking towards the car, you're walking away from your house. You're in the car, you're driving towards the shops. You recognize the different signposts. There's that tree, there's that building. Hear what I'm saying. There's a feeling of moving forward, a feeling of time passing, a feeling of the distance, and slowly, suddenly the shop is there. We recognize, we get that. That's a very vivid feeling of things changing, impermanence. Now, that's how we should think about our life, but we don't. So we wake up today feeling, since yesterday, we've driven, we've gone 24 hours closer to death. That's a fact. Don't like to hear it. It's a fact. We don't know when. The scary part is you don't know where the shop is, but you're moving forward all the time. So when you wake up in the morning, you don't feel as if you've moved forward. It's as if death is moving forward all the time. It's as if the shop keeps moving forward in front of you. You never feel like you're moving towards death. That's how we should start to think. And the thing is, we don't know when death will be. Even my friends on death row, like my friends in Kentucky, Mitchell, he's been there 30 plus years. He knows his death is coming. But one of my friends on death row also there, Frank, he was preparing for his appeals. They all prepare for their appeals, but his death date was getting closer. But suddenly he thought, oh, well, death may be 5 years' time, blah, blah, blah. But all of a sudden he got leukemia and he was dead in 6 months. So even on death row, the time of death is not certain. A friend of mine, who was married to a husband and wife. They were Buddhists, and the husband got some virulent cancer. He was young, and he was going to be dead in 2 months. Serious, So she went back to live with, they'd divorced. They'd been divorced. She went back to live with him to help him die. She'd do his practices every day. She'd read to him. And then what happened was 1 month came, 2 months came, 3 months, 4 months. He didn't die. He turned from a dying person into a living person. So she had to leave him again, because she was waiting for death to come. Oh, death will be in 2 months. I can manage it. I can be back with my ex-husband. But he didn't die. So even the dying date is not certain. But we cling to things as if there's a certainty, This is deep in our bones. This is deep, deep, deep in our instinct, because we can't stand change. It's a very gross mistake. It's a subtle one, but it's kind of heavy. It's clear. And this is so true. We believe people are living people. When you hear about Auntie Mary, she just died yesterday. And but how could she be dead? I just talked to her, we'll say. We say things like this. Why do you think we're shocked when someone dies? Because we don't believe that things will change. We want things to be permanent. We don't want things to change. Even just in the way we are with our lives, forget about death. I always use the example of one, it doesn't matter who, one American, one Hollywood. It was Nicole Kidman. You must have heard of her. She's an Australian actor. I always quote her. And I like the woman. I'm not trying to criticize her, but it's such a good example. As when she was still she was married to Tom Cruise. This is like whatever it was, 20 years ago. I remember reading an interview. And at the end of the interview, she said, "We will be together until we are 80. So why did she say that? Think about this. This is about grasping at permanence. Because why? Because the bubble of her life, we all are like this right now. Look at your life right now. It's a bubble. I've got my house, I've got my husband, I've got my children, I've got this, I've got the job, and it's real, it's solid, it's permanent. And it'll be there tomorrow. When you go to work, not these days, maybe you don't go to work, you stay at home. But if you go to work and when you're driving home, you believe your house will be there. You believe your husband will be there. You believe the children will be there. You believe it with utter, complete certainty. Well, she said, we will be together until we're 80. So what's happening is this, because of the attachment, and we've all got it, the attachment to that bubble, Tom, the kids, their life. And it was delicious. I'm not complaining. It's wonderful to have a good husband. It's wonderful to have a good life. Nothing wrong. But we add this other component onto it because we can't stand the thought of not having it, because attachment is like a vampire. We put this other component onto it that it won't change, that it will be there forever. We say we will be together forever. We say that. That's because of attachment. Because in other words, because something is delicious now, we assume it'll be delicious tomorrow. And this is where the other side comes. So indeed, Tom Cruise left her And they did split up like a year later, 2 years later. So then the bubble had burst. Her attachment stopped getting what it wanted, and she collapsed into despair. And now what happens? Now, as we say in English, you can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. Now she believes that despair was permanent. That's why we kill ourselves. So we're grasping at the delicious things that they'll never end. And then when the bad thing happens, we grasp at that and think that will never end. This is why we are so much suffering, up and down like yo-yos, grasping at things. Whatever is now, we grasp at it as if it were forever. That's grasping at things as permanent. And so the major one here that our teacher is telling us about is grasping at this person. You know, we recognize all this. We see this delusion in our minds. So you have to loosen the grip of this delusion and recognize daily. So every time, so the way normally now we look at the world and we say, oh yeah, there's death. That's natural. Oh yeah, look at all those people dying. Sometimes you get sad, but we don't get the wake up call. So what's the wake up call? You've got to say to yourself, that'll happen to me. Then it's the wake up call. And then you're forced to hear it. That will be me. So that, as I said before, the time when death begins to become real for us is when our beloveds die, our beloved father, our beloved child, our beloved boyfriend, our beloved baby, our pet. Then it becomes real. But still, until you say, after the funeral, after you're still working with the grief of your lost baby, if you can bear to think it, the learning is, that will be me. That will happen to me. That's when we get the wake-up call. So then the change comes, because the learning from that is, I mustn't waste this precious life. That's the point. That's the conclusion. I mustn't waste this precious life. I must stop grasping at it. I must give up attachment, give up anger, give up jealousy, give up the fears. Why? Because I don't want to die with a miserable mind. That's the wake-up call. This is not like squeezing your brain to realize emptiness. But it's got to squeeze the heart, I tell you. So what do you think? Ask me some questions. Maybe no questions. It's okay. Nothing there? No questions? Anastasia?
Oh, there is... Hello, Ven.Robina. I will be reading questions for you. So there is one question.
Yes.
Yes. So there is one question in the chat. It's already in English. So would any of the lamas or astrologers tell one the date they will die? It would be helpful if it were a short time, say 2 weeks, as one could quit their job and focus on the date. But I guess if it were 5 years, it might not be helpful, as it is a longer time.
It's very rare that they do. It's very rare. It seems to be it's very rare that they tell you. Even astrologers, even if they could see it, they very rarely tell us. But this is Buddha's entire point. This is the person who asked the question. It's a really good point. If you knew you had 2 weeks, then you'd prepare. But this is the point that Buddha's making. This is the point Atisha's making, that that's how we should be living our life. Then that will force us. You know, why would you want to waste your time until why would you think it doesn't matter to live your life properly just because you've got 5 years? What a waste of 5 years. You should live it like as if you would die today. So, you know, just to be thinking it's now worthwhile because I'm going to be dead in 2 weeks, I better start preparing. You should start preparing today, no matter what day you die, whether it's in 50 years or 1 day. You don't want to waste those 50 years. You don't want to waste that 1 day. So it's a good point, but you're missing the point by asking that question. That's what we have to give ourselves, is the realization. Don't wait for the astrologer to tell us. Don't wait for the doctor to tell us we've got cancer. Because when we live our life within the reality of impermanence, we will practice virtue. We will not waste our life. We will not do that stupid job. We know, okay. Most of us do not have the courage or the ability to give up the husband, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and go to the mountains for 2 weeks, not to mention 50 years, to really practice 24 hours a day. So given that we don't have that capability, that doesn't mean that's the only way to practice. If we have the Mahayana path, as we know, such kindness, then there are ways of transforming what your own husband, you know, you can have your husband and your kids and your job and your money in your bank and your pension plan within the reality of impermanence. And therefore you would do it with bodhicitta. You would see it as empty. You would see it as impermanent. You would see it as having no intrinsic nature. You would do it with bodhicitta. Therefore, when you die, you will be ready. You don't have to give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll to practice. It's harder to give up attachment when you've got the object, but that's how you'd live your life. That's how you'd live your life. Then you would not waste it. So you don't need to be warned. We've got to give ourselves our own warning. That's the whole point of this teaching. So it's a good point you make. Any other points?
So next question, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What is it?
Okay. So there are two same questions. How can we help a person with Alzheimer to die peacefully?
Okay, that's all. We're getting to that. That's all part of what we're going to be describing in the book. We're going to do that. That's it.
So, okay. So the next question is, if we're constantly thinking about death, then all our worldly life basically stops, and we dedicate ourselves to retreats and spiritual practice. Is it true?
No, see, that's what I said before. You could argue that is the best practitioner, the one who is really most devoted, would be the person who would give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and would go to the mountains and would be practicing day and night. But like I said before in my previous answer, we mostly are not capable of that. But that doesn't mean we don't practice. So when we understand the Mahayana teachings, we can get the best of both worlds. We can have our husband and our family and our possessions. It's much harder, but then you can learn to understand that it's impermanent, understand to give up attachment, and you can do it within the framework of then living your life with bodhicitta, attempting to be compassionate, because you can transform every second of your life. Of course, it's a lot harder, but we can do that. It doesn't mean that you've got to give up everything. If you can, fantastic. But if you can't, there's still ways of practicing, of making your life virtuous. But the other point is this. When the point is right now, at the moment, all we think about is how we're not how we're permanent. We don't think we think it, but it's implicit in everything we do, the absolute assumption that I won't die. So suddenly when we hear the truth that I will die, we almost don't know what to do with it. For example, you know, that example of, like, say, Nicole Kidman, Tom Cruise leaving her. If she suddenly, we think, well, now she believes she's going to be together till, she believes we're going to be together till we're 80. That's how we think now about our life. That's how we think now about our life. We assume this will be like this until we die. That's grasping at permanence. So then you suddenly think, oh, my husband could die. I could die. So then you think, I've got to think about death all the time. No, it becomes eventually, when you start to realize impermanence, that becomes implicit. Right now, the grasping at permanence is implicit, and we lead our life on the assumption that everything will last forever. But when you realize impermanence even a little bit, you still have your husband, you still have your children, you still have your job, but you know that they are impermanent and they could go at any moment. But you don't get depressed about it and think, well, what's the point of living with my husband if he could drop dead tomorrow? No, you realize because he could drop dead tomorrow, because your house could burn down tomorrow, you don't think this in a vivid way, it's just assumed. Then you make the most of it. You forgive your husband. You don't get angry. You give up attachment because you realize how foolish to have all this when he's gone like a dream tomorrow. No, it changes the way you live your life. It completely changes everything. I mean, one time, one class, a month ago, a woman talked about how she thinks all day, worried, full of fear. My husband might die. My husband might die. All the time thinking about it, so distressed. And she said, what meditation should I do? I said, forget about a meditation. Just tell yourself he will die. Face the fact. Yes, tell yourself he will die, but I don't know when. So what am I going to do? What's the action point? The action point is be happy while you've got him. So today, be so delighted he's not dead yet, and tomorrow morning you wake up and he's still breathing. It's a bonus. It'll change the whole way you live your life. Instead of living in the fear of reality. It's a bit like you've got no petrol. It's a bit like you haven't got your gas, your petrol meter's not working. Your petrol meter's not working, okay? There is some petrol there, but you have to keep driving. This is like living your life. You've got to keep driving. no matter what. And you have no idea when it will run out. Think of this. This is true. You do not know when that petrol meter when the petrol will run out. You have no idea, and there's no way to check. Let's think like that. That's life. So what she's saying is all the time, every time she's driving, she's living in fear that the petrol will run out. Well, the petrol will run out, so why be afraid of it? Make the most of every inch of that journey. Enjoy the journey. Do it properly. Live your life nicely. Be kind to your husband, because one day the petrol will run out. It's a good analogy. It's very scary to us because we just want to think the petrol will never run out. We're like ridiculous. Any other questions?
Yes. So the next question is, what does virtuous attitude at the moment of death mean? What exactly should we think about? And when we get unconscious, we can't really control ourselves.
That's right. All this will come. All this will come in time in the teachings. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I hope you don't die before that class.
So the next question is in English. Thank you for the lecture, Ven.Robina. Get well soon. How can you help a dying person, not a Buddhist? With what words can you support him if he fell into deep depression for this reason?
That's all going to come. If you can wait, please. I hope you can wait. That will come. All this information is going to come. This is the first piece of information of how to live our lives ourselves now within the framework of impermanence. It's all going to come in the teachings. How many classes do we have, Anastasia?
I think 4.
4. Okay. It'll come.
So the next question is, dear Ven.Robina, apart from the teachers who taught you and books that you read and faith that the life after death exists, do you have any personal experience in practices that actually can support this statement that the life after death exists and that it is actually true what is written in the teachings?
That's a very good question. No, for the answer is I have no personal experience of clairvoyance at all. But let me answer the question broadly. So this gets us right back to the question has to be, what is the source of all these teachings? It's a really good question. It's an excellent, we should ask this question. The question you're asking is, what is the source for this information? Well, like if you read a cookbook, we know well, if people publish cookbooks, they're quite rigorous in their discipline in checking the recipe, making sure it works before they dare even publish it. That's just a cookbook. So we know automatically, we take it as a given, if it's a valid cookbook, that information, the recipes are coming from the experience of the author. And if not that, then, usually with cooking it is that, but maybe they're the recipes of his mother. So his source is his mother. Right? We get this. We do understand this. Or maybe you've researched some recipes from the 19th century, so you publish those. So the source is the people in the 19th century who made those cakes or whatever. So we understand that. That's what we mean by scientific knowledge. It's someone who has done it, and from their experience, they then tell us what they experience. Now, we call that science, actually. So this is interesting. I remember having in New Zealand years ago, in Nelson, a little town in New Zealand, and it happened to be a scientist who asked the question. We're discussing Buddhism, obviously, and he said, who revealed these teachings, meaning all the teachings, to the Buddha? Who revealed them to the Buddha? Which is a brilliant question. Nobody has ever asked me that question since, So I said to him, would you ask Einstein, who revealed the teachings about relativity to him? And of course, he and everybody else laughed. But this is exactly the point about Buddhism. So you know perfectly well, if this were class about relativity, you would ask me, aside from all the teachers you've studied, aside from Einstein's own evidence, have you personally had any experience of the truth of relativity? So I'm telling you, no, I haven't. So then the next question has to be, well, then where did these people get the information from? Are you telling me, Robina, that this has been proved by some people? Are you telling me that? And I'm telling you, yes, it has been. That's what it is. Just as if you read a book about relativity, we will take it as a given that Mr. Einstein, whose reputation we've checked up on, who other people have said he's valid, who even some people since then have proved that he said what was true. It's exactly the same approach with the Buddha, because the Buddha is not a creator. He is not speculating. I mean, can you imagine if Einstein presents his findings about relativity and says he had a vision of it, or said he had a dream of it, or said he made it up? We will throw him out the door immediately as a complete fraud. Well, Buddha is exactly the same. We have to take it as a given here, and this is the whole point of Buddha's teachings. They are like the recipes in the cookbook. They are coming directly from the direct experience of the person called Buddha, and anybody who since then has followed Buddha's methodology, which he has presented, because that's the methodology he used to get these experiences of what he says he has observed to be true. Anybody else has got them, well, then you've checked. That's the sources. So we have to take that as a hypothesis, don't we? The only solution that I've got and you've got is if we choose to think Buddha's a valid person by checking on his reputation, just like we would with Einstein, checking on his teachings, we would then learn to enter into this series of this methodology that Buddha used, which is learning to be a Buddhist, and take it all as a working hypothesis. And so you continue to take it as your working hypothesis until such point you prove it to be true. Then it's your direct experience. So that's what we're doing here. Of course, it's been proved by all the people who've done it before, just like with Einstein. Don't believe them. Don't just blindly believe. But check on the sources, check on the different people, check on the reputation, and then look at the methodology, and you check one step at a time. So just like with Einstein, you can't prove E equals mc squared overnight. So where do you start? You start with 1 + 1 is 2. You start with math. Well, you can prove that. Then you go to the next one, you get some confidence. Then you get to grade 3, you prove that one, or you get more confidence. You get to grade 17, you get even more confidence. So as you go, you keep checking each step of the way, until eventually, as Dalai Lama says, if you get to a certain point in your own progress, following Buddha's methodology, that you find that he's wrong in his assessment, then of course you must reject him, just like Einstein or anybody else. So that's my long answer to you. So the other point to say, and this is the same with Einstein, or cooking, physics or cooking, same, any body of knowledge, if it is a valid body of knowledge, and we don't think that when it comes to spiritual, we think spiritual is just cross your fingers, hit and miss. Everybody can think what they like. Everybody can make up their own religion. Oh, I had a dream yesterday, so now you write a book about it. I mean, we are so ignorant and stupid when it comes to spiritual philosophy. Really arrogant, actually, because we don't think you can prove anything. That's the view. And if we've all come from being Christians, that's reasonable, because you can't prove God is right. If you can prove that God is right, that means you're equal to God, and you cannot talk this way, because God is a creator. There's no view like creator in Buddhism. Buddha was a regular guy like you and me who's done the hard work. So if any body of knowledge is valid, whether it's acupuncture, cooking, Buddhism, or physics, it's first got to be coherent intellectually. That is an absolute given. You've got to be able to present the whole theoretical package perfectly. And if you can't, then you can't experience it. It's like saying, oh, well, I can't possibly write down a recipe for a cake. It's too complicated. Well, then you can never get a cake. It's all hit and miss. That's just ignorance. So Buddhism has to be coherent first intellectually. And that's why they study it for 20, 30 years in the Tibetan monastic university system, which is coming from the great Indian monastic university system. That's the attitude in Buddhism, when you're seriously practicing, seriously studying. Most of us won't do it like that. Most of us just prefer to believe it because we're intellectually lazy, So that's my answer to you. I hope that helps. What else?
Mm-hmm. So the next question is, sometimes I do meditation on death according to Lam Rim, but somehow I don't feel any changes and progress in terms of my perception of death. Right. How can I improve my practice?
Okay, darling. It's like you're telling me you decide to play Bach music and you've got all your arpeggios and your scales and you're learning and practicing, and you're telling me after a while of practice you still can't play piano very well. And what's your suggestion, Robina? Well, I'm sorry to tell you, to be disappointing, but just keep practicing. There's no other answer. Just be patient and humble with yourself and stop expecting your biggest mistake isn't that you haven't realized impermanence. Your biggest mistake is assuming you should have. Please hear that point. That's our biggest mistake all the time. And that's attachment. You're thinking you should be better than you are. That's your mistake, baby. So just relax and keep practicing. Just relax and keep practicing. Just relax and keep practicing. Just relax, please, and keep practicing. Next question.
Okay, so the next question is, what can I do if I have a fear not of the death itself, but potential physical sufferings before the death? And how can I get and keep virtuous attitude in such situation?
That's everybody's point, isn't it? That's the commonest one I hear everybody say. There's no choice but to start dealing with your problems now. And this is where we have to understand the mind. When we're studying the Lam Rim, we understand the mind. And we learn that in the middle scope, or like I like to call it high school, we really learn to be our own therapist, as Lama Yeshe puts it, you know. So we really start to learn to understand what the mind is made up of, these different states of mind. And the ones we first have to become familiar with are these three poisons, as we hear Buddha talk about, the three toxic emotions. So the root delusion, the root misconception, the root lie, the root emotional drama in our mind, we deal with that when we get to realize emptiness. Forget that one. That's the deep assumption of a self. But on the basis of this in daily life, we have attachment, which is this bottomless pit of neediness, a bottomless pit of dissatisfaction. I'm never enough, never have enough. So therefore, next function of attachment is we hanker after something, crave something, believing that when I get it, I'll get happy. And then we manipulate to get it, we control to get it, then we possess it. All that is the function of attachment. And this is the bottom line. This is the basis of our suffering every second. So when attachment doesn't get what it wants, which, for example, would be when there is pain, then the mind panics. We get that. So we know we can't stand pain. We know we can't stand pain. So don't wait till you die and hope you won't have pain then. Start dealing with the objects of your aversion right now. The headache you get. You know, the second we get any pain, I get arthritic pain sometimes. And the second my finger, I think, oh no, here we go again. I have this panic attack and I go for I go try and get the anti-inflammatory tablets and hoping the pain will go away. Start getting used to the pain. Start being brave and confront the pain and feel it and be glad you're purifying your negative karma and notice it and analyze it and blah, blah, blah. Don't resist it. Practice now dealing with your headaches, dealing with the knee ache, dealing with the bad things happening. Then if you have got pain at the time of death, if you've practiced all your life, you won't have so much suffering. If you do have pain, it'd be marvelous not to. I agree. So start getting used to the bad things happening right now. But if every time you get a headache, you freak out, every time you get a knee ache, you freak out, well, when you're going to have pain at death, you'll lose the plot completely. It's obvious. And the other thing, of course, if you do your proper practice and you practice purification every day and you practice generosity and goodness and you create lots of merit, then you can be pretty certain you will die peacefully without much pain because you've purified the karma. This is possible. Things aren't set in stone, You can purify. Any other questions there, Katya?
Yes. So the next question is, what do you think about euthanasia and suicide?
Well, it doesn't matter what I think. I'll tell you the Buddhist teachings. According to the Buddhist teachings. So, yeah. So, okay. This is all part of our future teachings as well. So, okay. So, euthanasia. I crack jokes and say every time we have fancy words, we always use Greek. It seems to be even in Russian, if you use Greek. You say euthanasia in not Greek. Who are you? You're Russians. Do you say euthanasia in Russian as well? Okay, so even the Russians use Greek as their fancy words. Any word that we want to make it serious or important, we make it Greek. It's so hilarious. So euthanasia is one of those. Instead of calling it killing someone, mercy killing, we give it a fancy word. So, okay, and then suicide. What is that? Another Greek word, isn't it? Killing yourself. Okay, let's analyze this. To understand this, which is part of the teachings I need to give you, so it's a perfect opportunity, we have to understand how karma works. Fundamentally necessary, you know, because the karmic seeds, because the whole process of karma is driving us throughout our life and will absolutely be driving what happens at the time of death. So we need to be we need to be familiar with this process, and therefore by practicing we need to get in charge of this process. So okay, in general, the Buddha is telling us every millisecond what we think and do and say, every millisecond of what we think and therefore do and therefore say is part of this process of quote unquote creating karma, doing actions. Karma is meaning action. And every millisecond of what we think and do and say is an action that will then leave a seed in our mind, in our bank vault. No thoughts go astray, no action and word go astray. And those seeds, you know, when the time is right, will ripen as our experiences. And in fact, there's 4 ways that we will experience the fruits of those seeds we have planted. So in order for, and there are 4 ways are 1, the type of rebirth we get. Human, animal, or others that Buddha would assert that exist. 2, you know, think of ourselves as humans. We got a human body. From the Buddha's point of view, this is like we won the lottery. It's not really winning the lottery. It's not just good luck. We must have had plenty in our bank vault at the time of our past death, not more than a few weeks before we found our way to our present mother's fallopian tube, where our consciousness joined mummy's egg and daddy's sperm. That was the beginning of me. So in order for that to happen, for us to get a human body, which is like so rare, there's 7 billion humans, there are probably 7 billion mosquitoes in one evening in your, under one tree in your backyard. So clearly there are a lot more other consciousnesses, sentient beings, mind possessors than humans. So to get a human one is not the best, but it's the best of a bad lot. Okay? So that's what we were trying to help our loved ones, at least get another decent human rebirth. So for us, in order for that karmic seed of that would have to have been a karmic seed of non-killing. Non-killing is the key, is the main cause. In general, non-harming. Any action we do of non-harming, meaning consciously refraining from killing, refraining from lying, refraining from stealing, drops a powerful seed into our different bank vaults. So to get a human body, you need especially a non-killing. That's the best of the non-harming actions. So in order for the karmic seed that was triggered before we stopped breathing in our past life, not more than a few weeks before we found our way to our mummies, blah, 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 like I said, that's why we need to be virtuous at that time, and we're going to discuss all that, what it means. Then one of those karmic seeds has to have been activated. So in order for one of the karmic seeds to bring a human body, of the 4 results of karma, this is called the fully ripened result. And it needs a complete action to have been done of non-killing in order to drop a complete seed into that bank vault in order for us to get the human body. Okay, so that means that when you do an action, in this case of non-killing, for it to be a complete action, to drop a seed into your main bank vault, to be the cause of getting a human body, there need to be 4 things in place when you do that action that qualifies it as a complete action, which is the type that brings a rebirth. A complete action of killing will be exactly the same, and that will bring you a kind of animal rebirth or something like that, a suffering rebirth. So in terms of human one, let's look at the 4 things that need to be in place when we did that particular one action of non-killing. So the first one has to be the object. So in the case of non-killing, the object of that action is obviously a living being. Let's say it's that mouse in your kitchen. I'm keeping this simple. There are more details to it, but we'll just keep it simple. So the first of these 4 conditions that need to be in place to qualify this action as a complete action of non-killing, the first is there has to be the object, and a little mouse. The second, and this is the crucial one, The second component, the second thing that has to be in place is your mind involved in it. And there's several things here, but the two main ones are 2A is intention, not like the way we use it, good intention, not like that, but bare bones. Intention is there every millisecond in the mind. It drives everything we do. And it's volition. It's volition. It's not good motivation. That's different. Volition. And in this case, it would be, I will not kill that mouse, or I must be careful not to kill the mouse. That's the intention. And that's the first one that arises, and it's there every second, every millisecond of all of our life. We're driven by an intention. 99% they're instinctive because we've practiced them in the past, and many of the negative things we do are just instinctive. So we don't even notice this. But it's there every second. So there has to be that. There's got to be, I will be careful and not kill that mouse. It's got to be there. The thought has to be there. The thought has to be there. And the intention is the meaning of the word karma, the word action. It's mental action, and that's intention. And as you'll see in my examples, if that's missing, you could argue there's no karma created. It's logical. You could argue that. So first, 2A is intention. I will not kill the mouse. But 2B is the crucial one. This is what we'd say is your reason, your motivation. Why aren't you killing that mouse, Robina? Compassion. Let's just say compassion. So there's 1, the object, a living mouse. 2A, intention, I will not kill the mouse. 2B, motivation, because of compassion. Now, these two come so totally together, we don't even notice. We don't even notice. They just come together. So 3, the action. You catch the mouse. 4, you release it. Happy mouse. Thank you, Robina. Goodbye. That's roughly speaking, that's a complete action of non-killing that will drop a seed into your main bank vault that eventually will be the seed that will be triggered at the time of one of your deaths that will determine you get a decent human body. It's like that. It's technical like that. And we've got trillions of seeds in our bank vaults. Okay, now let's look at the action called killing me. Well, this is not exactly the same karma as another being, but it's still got the same conditions there, you can still see what's going on. So there's an object, and the object is in fact yourself. But the key ones, the real key ones here are the second one, the intention, I will kill myself. And what's your motivation? Well, I don't think I've met many people who think I will kill myself. And then you ask them why. Oh, I'm so blissfully happy. I'm so compassionate. I'm so full of love of the whole world. I'm so happy. I want to kill myself. I'm not being mean, but look at the despair we experience in our tragic lives. Look at our suffering. We don't understand our mind. We don't understand karma. We don't know why things happen. So we just live in despair. We can't bear the pain. That's usually why we kill ourselves. We know that. I mean, it's unbelievable sadness. Should have unbelievable compassion. So you do the action. So the key factor in whether it's killing the mouse or not killing the mouse or giving $1,000 or giving, whatever it is, whatever the action we do, the intention to do it, I will give $100. I will steal $100. The motivation, the intention is causes it to become a karmic seed because intention is the mind. But what qualifies it, what characterizes the action as to whether it's negative or positive, and that means which bank vault will it drop into, your good bank vault or your bad bank vault, that's determined by the motivation. And in this case, it's called compassion. So that's a typical example of let's say, not killing a mouse. That's a typical example of a virtuous action of non-killing. It had all the pieces in place. If the creature was there, you had the intention, you had the motivation, you did the action, and the result came, a happy mouse, living mouse. Roughly speaking, it's more detailed than that. And it's exactly the same with a negative action. So what determines whether an action we do is labeled negative or positive, and obviously there are degrees of negativity and there are degrees of positivity, is not even the intention, I will kill myself. It's the motivation. So logically, in general, Buddha, not logically, now start again. So in Buddhist psychology, Buddha divides all the contents of our mind roughly into 3 categories, but the first 2 are the main ones. Those actions that are neurotic, I-based, fear-based, delusional, distressing, disturbing, miserable, and which cause us unbelievable suffering, just the very having of them, and then based upon which we will then do actions that kill, steal, lie, harm, etc., etc., etc. This is what causes the nightmare in samsara. So then that action of killing myself, if the motivation is not virtuous, is not loving, is not compassionate, is not wise, is not clear, then it could only be motivated by the opposite. And depending on how strong that motivation is depending on how negative the action is. And if a negative seed is triggered at the time of your death, then you'll be born in a lower realm. And that's just the technical answer. Now, euthanasia is different because your motivation isn't negative. Your motivation isn't despair. Your motivation usually is compassion. So let's just change the action from killing the mouse, from not killing it. So there's the mouse, same thing, there's the mouse. 2, intention, I will kill the mouse. Why? Compassion, look, the poor thing is suffering. I can't bear the suffering. Look at the poor suffering of the mouse. I must kill it. 3, you do the action. 4, dead mouse. What's the karma you've created? Well, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, as Lama Zopa says, compassion is not enough. You need wisdom. This takes us a while to think about this one. So you meant well. You really had compassion. You are genuinely compassionate for that poor mouse's suffering. You are genuinely compassionate for your poor grandma's suffering. No argument. Nobody disagrees. So on the basis of this, you kill your grandma. Now, let me ask you the question. Have you got certainty? Are you wise enough to know exactly the karmic seed that was triggered in your grandma's mind as she started to breathe? Are you absolutely certain that it was a virtuous seed? And that are you absolutely certain that she will therefore get another decent human body after she died? If you can say yes to those, then it is okay to kill your grandma. You could argue that. The court mightn't agree. They might, put you in prison. But from the karmic point of view, that's called incredible wisdom. But who has that wisdom? Nobody. So you're playing Russian roulette with your grandmother. So not cool. So and the point is that you don't create very much negative karma because your motivation was pure. Not pure, but you had compassion. But you don't realize your motivation is mixed by your fears and your attachment and your aversion to the idea of sick grandma. So you panic and you kill her. Same with the mouse, same with your little dog. I mean, poor veterinarians these days spend all their lives killing people's pets, Because actually, if we're honest enough, there is compassion there. But our attachment and our aversion, we can't stand seeing the suffering. And we don't have enough wisdom to know if it's going to help our pussycat. We think it's helping our pussycat because it looked like it was peaceful when it died, but we're not clairvoyant. We cannot see its mind. We do not know the karma it created. Maybe most of you people have killed your pussycat and your doggy-woggy. I'm not trying to criticize anybody. We all do the same thing. So we're trying to analyze it very clinically. So the key thing is, it's not a question Buddha says you shouldn't kill. It's not a question of that. It's not being like a big stick. No. Any action you do in your daily life, if you are not certain about the consequences of that action, especially if the consequences could be terrible, you would never do it. It's reasonable. If I've got a headache, and you definitely have compassion for me, but you're just not sure whether the pill you want to give me is cyanide or aspirin, I would ask you to mind your own business, keep your pill to yourself, and let me stick with my headache. That's called wisdom. So if you've got wisdom, which means you're clairvoyant, in this case, heavy-duty wisdom, and you're clear as crystal what is right for that person, then that's different. But we have compassion, but as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. So you're fine because your motivation was okay. You don't create much negative karma. But what about the mouse? What about your grandma? We never asked that question. And you ought to ask it because the reason you killed your grandmother was to help your grandmother. But if you suddenly discover, if you take on board the Buddha's view that your grandma's mind will continue, and then the time she stopped breathing is when the karmic seed that will determine her next life was triggered, and if you can't be certain it was not a positive one, then you have no right to kill your grandmother. I'm being very direct here. There's a million questions around this, and I absolutely want you to discuss it. But that's a very straightforward presentation. So it's not a moralistic issue. It's a practical one. And of course, all of this is based on the assumption, the Buddha's view, our proposition here, that the consciousness continues. And I'm not asking you to believe me, like the person's question before. I'm not asking you to believe me. This is my working hypothesis. I'm taking as my source what I consider valid sources. I haven't realized it yet. I'm not clairvoyant. I cannot say, but I'm using this as my working hypothesis. So I'll do my best not to kill myself and not to kill my grandma or the ant or the dog for that matter. So that's my answer. So please, I'd love some questions based on that.
Yeah, there is a question about this subject. So if you kill a mosquito and recite a purifying mantra to improve the mosquito's karma, is it not a solution? And the same with a mouse.
Again, I repeat the question. Are you certain it will work? Excuse me. Don't play. I mean, are you if you're not certain, it's so clear. It's like saying you give me cyanide, but while I'm giving you the cyanide, I'll give you an antidote to the cyanide. It just might work. Excuse me. This is not a religious idea. This is a technical one. If you're not certain that that mantra will help, if you're not certain, then don't do it. And we know what people, who do you think, whose benefit are we describing here? Ourselves as much as anything, as well as the poor mosquito. If you can't be certain that that pill is an aspirin, if you cannot be certain that there's no car coming around the corner when you send your 4-year-old child across the road, then you please send your child across the road. If you're not certain, you would not take the risk. So don't play Russian roulette with people's lives. This is the kind of clarity we need. It's just that it's very difficult in our culture because we are addicted to killing. Even all our religious teachings. I was taught as a Catholic that God made these creatures for our benefit. We're allowed to eat them, kill them, whatever. And even our scientific findings are considered that mosquitoes have no brain. They don't feel anything. It doesn't matter. Kill as many mosquitoes as you like. So our whole culture is in that direction. This is quite a hard teaching to hear. But don't hear it in a religious way. Don't hear it in a moralistic way. Don't hear it in a punitive way. Try and hear it practically, literally. Of course, this is not easy. And I'm not asking you to believe me. This is just the thinking you would try to do if you were a Buddhist. The first reason is because you don't want to program your mind with negativity. You don't want to program your mind with a tendency to kill, not to mention the benefit of the mosquito. What else?
Well, there are lots of questions, but a bit on different subjects. So, yeah. So the next question is, how can I overcome the fear of ghosts and world of dead?
Sorry, what? Can I start again, Katya? What?
How can I overcome the fear of ghosts and the world of dead and this kind of things? So that's the question.
I can't answer that question unless I know whether that person actually sees spirits and ghosts. If they want to talk to me, I'm very happy. I need to know more details. If they'd like to talk to me, I'm very happy to talk to you. Because it's an important question. So if you'd like to talk to me, please do. Otherwise, can you please write more detail? And so do you experience seeing ghosts? Do you have this experience yourself? That is the helpful piece of the information for me to answer your question if you don't want to talk to me directly. Meanwhile, give me the next question, please.
Yeah. Okay, so there are two questions very similar about cancer patients. So the question is, about cancer patients, cancer.
I don't understand this word. What is it?
Cancer.
Oh, cancer. Sorry.
Cancer. I'm sorry about my pronunciation. Yes. So I'm sorry about my accent. Yes. So the question is, if we are talking about the person with a brain cancer, who will most likely have an awful pain at the moment of death, or will be under heavy drugs, how this person should or could practice at the moment of death?
We'll look into that when we go more detail into the time of death. All these, even what I've said earlier, will come later. But this will come when we get into the time of how to help people, what's the best way to stop pain, how to help a person navigate the pain. This will all come later. Please.
And the similar question is, what is the reason from the Buddhist point of view, what is the reason of this type of death, like cancer patients, very heavy, sufferings during death?
The question is, why do people suffer? In other words, the question is, why do people suffer? The law of karma for the Buddha is what he's observed to be the law that runs the universe. No one runs it. We run within the law. We exist within the law of karma, like gardens exist within the law of botany. It's just the way it is. It's been observed that certain things will ripen as weeds, certain things will ripen as flowers. It's the law of botany. So one has to learn it. So if we have the law of karma, everything we experience necessarily, every millisecond of everything we experience is called happiness is the fruit of a virtuous action. Every millisecond of what we experience, which is called suffering, is the fruit of a negative action. It's just the way it is. It's not punishment. It's not reward. In Buddhism, there's no punisher. There's no rewarder. There's no creator. It's a natural law. So if you have pain, it's the fruit of your negative karma. But there's lots of attitudes you can have towards that. Because every time you have a moment of pain, that's the end of that particular seed. I remember one time I did a conference with in Miami, and the topic was, why do bad things happen to good people? And there was me, a rabbi, a Catholic, and a Lutheran. It sounds like a joke, doesn't it? And so I gave the answer about karma. It was very practical. Why do bad things happen to good people? Because of karma, due to karma. I explained karma. And then I remember the rabbi clapped. And people were shocked, all the Jews in the audience. He said he was a Kabbalah rabbi and they believe in reincarnation. And he had and karma, they don't use those words, obviously. But he said, we have a saying, every time something bad happens, we go, great, one less debt to repay. So there's a whole attitude, understanding the law of karma, when bad things happen, whether they're death or now, we understand them as the fruit of our past actions, and we own our own actions. We own responsibility for all our own happiness and all our own suffering. When you have the view of karma, and we're going to go into this more, you don't feel like a victim. You don't feel like it's been done to you. You don't feel like you're being punished. You own it as your own experience. And that alleviates a lot of the pain and then you're delighted because you're getting rid of it. So there's many attitudes you can have. And this includes an answer to the first person's question also. This is another whole discussion. But yeah, that's the result of negative karma. That's the technical answer. We'll go into this as we go along. We'll describe all these things as we go along. What else? More questions?
So this is the answer from this person about ghosts. So she said, I can't switch on my sound. So she said,
sorry, what?
She said, I can't switch on my sound. Okay. But she said that when I was a child, I saw some ghosts a few times. And even now, when I'm adult, I'm still worried that my loved ones, my relatives, will come to me as ghosts.
Okay, I understand. All I can do is briefly tell you now about the Buddhist view about these types of beings, and I'm sure this will come up again in our discussion in the next few weeks. So from the Buddhist point of view, there are these, within samsara, as Buddhism talks, there's all these different types of rebirth. Again, not asking you to believe any of this, I'm just telling you the view. So there's a whole spectrum of types of rebirth. One, for example, the best type within samsara, there's more opportunities. This is just still within samsara, which means we're still all suffering to some degree. The best one is like equivalent to heaven. The Muslims call it paradise. Christians call it heaven. I presume Russians call it heaven as well. And so from the Buddhist point of view, they call that the God realm, the God with a small g. It's a very blissful type of experience. And these are real experiences, okay? And so some beings can be like that. And we might call them guardian angels, the good ones who will protect us and take care, or the saints. That's a very typical one. They'd be the saints, I think. So then they're real beings. From the Buddhist point of view, they wouldn't call those names saints and guardian angels, but they can be very positive and they can be helpful, and people feel their presence. They can be useful. Then you've got the human rebirth down further. Then further down, you've got the animals, which is very suffering. And even further down from that, much more suffering, is called the spirits, but not in the way we call it in Christianity. But this includes all the ghosts, ones you're talking about, all kinds of other disembodied beings who are very, very suffering, and some of them can be very harmful. So this generally, isn't it, in the Christian teachings, they call it the devil, isn't it? They would say, you've got the ghosts who haunt houses, or you've got the devil who comes into you. Well, from the Buddhist point of view, these are all spirits, and some are very harmful, some are very kind of just, but they're all suffering very badly, and some harm us and some are just hanging around, you know. So that's what a ghost is, absolutely. So then due to some karma, so let's say, for example, I'm very attached to my house and I die with a lot of attachment, I will get born as a ghost there. That's literally, it's a type of rebirth. You're disembodied, your body's like made of air, and it's very suffering rebirth, and you're very possessive. Many people around the world talk about houses that are, you know, you've seen them yourself. These are spirits, they're real beings. And the other kind of spirit, the one I mentioned before, when people hear voices. This is what the Catholics call the devil coming into you. Not the devil. They don't talk like that in Buddhism. These are spirits. So let's say you and I have got a very strong relationship and we get very angry with each other. We fight every day and then I die with lots of anger. I'm going to get born as a spirit and I'm going to get right inside you and I'm going to harm you. That kind of spirit. That's a very intense one when you get possessed by somebody. These are all in the spirit realm and they're all very suffering beings. So sweetheart, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Try and have compassion. If you have any prayers you say, if you're Buddhist, maybe you say, "Om Mani Padme Hum," have compassion. I mean, lots of people see these spirits. Many people, everywhere you go, all over the world, people have this kind of experience. I remember a couple of times in my life, 3 times, I think, I've met spirits, just briefly. Some people live with them all the time. Some people have incredible suffering. Some are possessed by these spirits and they harm them terribly, you know. And so these are all spirits. So you just have compassion, sweetheart. If you say, "Oh, I remember one time I woke up in the middle of the night in one place and I was suffocated by a spirit. It was crystal clear, you know, and I just said, "Om Mani Padme Hum," the compassion mantra, and they went away. So you just have compassion because they're suffering, but be very clear and strong and firm, you know, but have compassion in your heart. And by having the compassion mantra and doing your practice every day and doing compassion mantra, you protect the place and you protect yourself. So sweetheart, I hope that helps you. If you have more questions, please ask me. And I'm sure we can talk more about this as time goes by. How many more questions in this last 3 minutes?
Oh, there are quite a lot of questions. So
next week.
Okay, so
look, get them all organized, the questions. Let me see them brief. How many are there? 10, 20?
No, I think about maybe 6 or 7.
Okay, we can deal with them next time. It's okay. Well, all the questions will get covered, I promise. So basically, we just started now by looking at why we need to help people at the time of death, and we're going to go into details, but we've got to start living our life first within the framework of impermanence, which means we'll change, we'll give up attachment, we'll give up anger, we'll be more realistic, we'll be more comfortable, and then death will not be so difficult. We'll discuss all this as we go. So far, so good, everybody, okay? So I hope we all live till next week. All right, we'll do our best to live. We have karmic petrol tankers. Our petrol tanker morality hasn't run out yet. We'll go into karma. You see, I'll just say this now out of interest. You know, when we finish, I'll just finish the 4 ways that karma ripens, just to help you finish with that topic. So we discussed about the karma of non-killing. Well, the way non-killing ripens, all karmas have all these 4 results. One is, in our case, we've got a human body. We won the lottery. Let me tell you this. I read this in a book somewhere. Some lama said, this is hilarious, that at the time of a male and female having sex, at that moment, billions of consciousnesses that have recently passed away are all hovering around trying to get in. And we got in. We should be so happy. We won the lottery getting a human body. Don't laugh about it. That's hilarious, I think. So the first result of non-killing is you get it. In this case, our case, you've got a decent human body. Second, now look at this. Within this human person, you've got a mind, haven't you? And we've got the spectrum from Hitler and Stalin to Mother Teresa and anywhere in between. So the second way our karma ripens, in terms of all the actions we have, is the tendency to keep doing it. So, for example, if you've got a tendency you could also be born with no tendency to kill. Some people are like that. I remember my friend who's a Buddhist, when she was telling me when she was taking the lice out of her little boy's head when he was 3. She said he was crying with compassion for the lice. Mommy, don't hurt them. It's their home. Leave them alone. She hadn't had time to teach him this, and he's never killed a living being, and he's 40-something now. That means he came into this life, not only did he get a human body as a result of non-killing, but the next one, this is the most important, he was born with a tendency not to kill, because he's lived in vows of non-killing in the past and he's purified his killing. We're going to go into all this. So that's a special one. The third way non-killing would ripen, the third way our karma ripens is called experiences similar to the cause. So if you, in this, so far, we are still alive, aren't we? So this is because we have still got non-killing karma in this particular gas tank. You know, there are 4. The fully ripened one, which is the type of birth. Your tendency to not kill, there's still petrol in that tank, and we don't want to kill. The third one is your experiences. So as a result of non-killing in the past, you'll be born in this life and you won't die young and you won't get killed. Well, that's us so far. Aren't we fortunate? The fourth one, way that karma ripens, is called environmental karma. So if you've got the environmental karma of non-killing, whatever you eat, what you drink will nourish you. You've got good well-being, you're very healthy, you're very strong. Whatever you eat nourishes you. You don't have to worry too much. The water's not too bad. The air's not too bad. That's the fruit of non-killing. So good environment, the result of non-killing. You're not dead yet, and you haven't got killed, result of non-killing. You got a tendency to not kill, and you got the human body. And who created all this? We did. We're our own creators, you know. So you look at the opposite, killing, you get a lower realm rebirth, like an animal birth or a spirit birth. Second, even in the human body, look at the humans. Most humans kill something. That's the fruit of past killing. They wake up in this life with the tendency to kill. They kill the roaches and the rats, each other. Look at the world. 3, look at the people who die young. Fetuses, babies. This is a result of past killing. You die young. You get killed. And the 4th one, environmental. Look at the people who are sick. Look at all the people with COVID-19 now. You look at the people who are sick all their lives with sicknesses and allergies and weakness and no good health. That's because of killing. So everything we experience, those 4 results, type of rebirth, tendency, and experience, and the environment. We'll go into more details about this. So let's hope between now and next week, our petrol tank of non-killing in terms of an experience, meaning we'll still be alive next week, so we can carry on understanding how to die properly. All right, you people. Thank you very much. Much love. Jang chup sem chog Rinpoche. Ma kie panam kie yuchi kie panyam pa me pa yang gong ne gong du helba shog. Here we go. Say it in Russian, please. Little dedication prayer. All these seeds we've planted, I'll just say this first, all these seeds we've planted, these 2 hours we've been together, as many moments is as many seeds we've planted. We think we're going to nourish these seeds from this moment forward, trying to realize impermanence, trying to become a better person. Why? For our sake first, so we can be a benefit to others. And the other little prayer, bodhicitta, this amazing aspiration to help others, may it grow and grow in the hearts of all. So say it in Russian, please. Somebody.
В силу этой добродетели достигну я быстро состояния Гуру Будды и приведу всех без исключения существ-скитальцев к этому просветленному состоянию. Пусть драгоценная высшая бодхичитта, та, что не породилась, да породится, а та, что породилась, да не ослабеет, но возрастает все больше и больше.
Okay, thank you, darlings, so much. So happy to see you all, hear you all. We'll meet next week. Much love.